Hey everyone, it's your boy Akil again, and this time I'm going to comment on an issue that arose in the news also while I was in the hospital over the past several weeks dealing with the aftermath of knee surgery. It's another one of those issues that cropped up that I was itching to comment on while I was in that hospital bed, but from which I refrained on commenting because as much as I love the sound of my voice, I also take a little bit of pride, actually a lot of pride, in my appearance. And I didn't think that wearing one of those hospital gowns and lying in a hospital bed was um, the optimal look for me to have while I was commenting on this issue. So, without further ado, the issue I want to comment on today is that of doctor-assisted suicide. I'm sure you've all heard of this issue before. It's the issue concerning whether patients who are suffering from terminal illnesses that, according to the judgment of the doctors treating them, are going to cost them their lives before long, and who are suffering a great deal of physical pain and often mental and psychological anguish as well, should have to tough it out and, if anything, die natural deaths, or whether they should be able to be assisted in committing suicide by physicians with the authority of the law. Now, this is a controversial issue in many different jurisdictions around the world. I believe one or two states here in the U.S. allows doctor-assisted suicide in some form. The Netherlands is known, or at least Amsterdam is known for allowing it under as long as certain procedures are followed. Now, on February 6th, the Supreme Court of my home country of Canada handed down a ruling in a case called Carter versus Canada, in which the Supreme Court of Canada actually ruled that Canada has to allow doctor-assisted suicide in some form. I actually think that this was the correct ruling, for the Supreme Court of Canada to hand down. Now, Canada has a constitution with a Charter of Rights and Freedoms similar to the U.S. Bill of Rights. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms essentially, which was adopted in 1982, essentially lays out a number of rights that Canadians enjoy and that are judicially enforceable. Generally, that charter grants Canadian citizens the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Based on that right to life, liberty, and security of the person, the Supreme Court of Canada has decided that Canada's law that forbids doctor-assisted suicide is unconstitutional, and Canada's Parliament has another year in which to rewrite the law to bring it into accordance with the Supreme Court's ruling. Now, I want to focus specifically on one aspect of the court's ruling that I found very gratifying. Now, in the past, I've seen a lot of debates on this issue in which opponents of assisted suicide talk about the right to life. They say that people have a right to life, and that allowing people to die with dignity, as proponents of doctor-assisted suicide like to describe it, somehow violates the right to life. Those folks, in my opinion, are completely mistaken. Now, those of you who've been following my videos may remember that in my very first video last November, after the midterm congressional elections here in the U.S., I talked about the issue of the right to vote. Many folks believe that people have a moral duty to vote, and I contradicted those folks by explaining that the idea of a right means that people have a choice as to whether to do something or not to do that thing. So if you're going to say that people have a right to do X, Y, Z, it makes no sense for you to then turn around and say that they have any kind of duty to exercise that right. Because once you impose on them a duty to exercise the right, you're not really respecting their right anymore at all. You're actually violating their right. I also alluded to that issue once again in a more recent video that I posted a few weeks ago about the terrorist attacks on the headquarters of the French magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris. That concerned the issue of the right to free speech. A lot of folks were saying, "Je suis Charlie," I am Charlie, to show their support for the right to free speech. Because I disagreed so much with a lot of the content of Charlie Hebdo's satire and its cartoon content, and its editorial content, I actually refrained, and a lot of other people refrained, from jumping on the Je suis Charlie bandwagon, and I thought that I had every right to do that. Once again, if you really believe in the right to free speech, it makes no sense to tell people that they have any kind of duty to lend their voices to a certain point of view, because then you're violating their right to free speech. You're telling them what to say. You're telling them that they have to send a message that they may not want to send. And in that case, you're taking choice out of their hands. Once you take choice out of their hands, you are violating their rights, because choice is what lies at the very heart of the concept of a right. In much the same way, I mean, there are any number of other examples I could give. You know, if a woman, for example, wants to have an abortion, then, you know, her right to have an abortion, if you support abortion rights, means that no one should stand in her way. However, it also means that a woman who's facing an unexpected pregnancy has the right to have that baby and carry the pregnancy to term if she so desires, and if anybody stops her from carrying that pregnancy to term, then her right to, you know, control her own body and her own reproductive system has also been violated, just as surely as it would have been if she had wanted to have an abortion and the government or someone else had stopped her from going through with it by force. The same principle applies in the context of doctor-assisted suicide. It makes no sense to say that people should not be able, you know, people facing terminal illnesses should not be able to end their lives if they, you know, based on the idea of a right to life. Because in that case, what you're actually saying is that they have a duty to keep on living. They have a duty to tough it out and to endure all of the pain and suffering, both physical and mental, that comes with, you know, fighting a terminal illness. Whether it's the illnesses that were suffered by the plaintiffs in this case that the Supreme Court of Canada just heard, or what have you. Now, when you say that you respect people's right to life, then you actually should respect people's right not to live, at least under some circumstances. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court of Canada said in this decision. I quote verbatim from paragraph 63 of the Supreme Court of Canada's decision. They said, and I quote, "This said, we do not agree that the existential formulation of the right to life requires an absolute prohibition on assistance in dying, or that individuals cannot waive their right to life. This would create a duty to live rather than a right to life, and would call into question the legality of any consent to the withdrawal or refusal of life-saving or life-sustaining treatment. The sanctity of life is one of our most fundamental societal values. Section 7 of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms is rooted in a profound respect for the value of human life. But Section 7 also encompasses life, liberty, and security of the person during the passage to death. It is for this reason that the sanctity of life is no longer seen to require that all human life be preserved at all costs. And it is for this reason that the law has come to recognize that in certain circumstances, an individual's choice about the end of his or her life is entitled to respect." End of quote. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think the Supreme Court of Canada got it right. It got the philosophical issue that underpins doctor-assisted suicide completely right in this case, as far as I can tell. Once again, it makes no sense to oppose doctor-assisted suicide based on the idea of a right to life. It does make sense, at least in terms of logical consistency, to oppose doctor-assisted suicide or euthanasia or whatever you want to call it on the based on the idea of a duty to live. Just be aware that if you oppose this particular policy, this particular reform, what you are really saying is that people have a duty to continue to fight these illnesses until they die of natural causes, no matter how much suffering they endure as a result. Keep that in mind whenever you are formulating an opinion on this issue. And also keep in mind the question of whether people's individual rights and freedoms as human beings really matter very much to you, and think of how those rights, the rights of peoples to determine how they're going to live their own lives, and in this case how they're going to, whether they're going to end their own lives, really are germane to this issue and how they affect your position on the issue. So once again, this is Akil signing off, and don't forget to share this video far and wide and to comment on it as you please. I look forward to the discussion. Peace out.